Good morning, students. It is snow day here in Las Cruces and class got canceled. However, because of the tight schedule of the semester, I cannot have you miss the information we were supposed to cover today, especially the in-class activity, because it would help you a lot with the end of unit activity that we are going to be doing on Tuesday. I will talk a little bit more about the in-class activity at the end of the lecture, but it's just going to be a short lecture to help you solidify the information that you covered by reading modules 4, 5, and 6. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking about the psychological experiments and pretty much research methods of how research is done in psychology. So we have the most important elements in psychological experiment is the independent variable and the dependent variable. So independent variables are the variable that the researcher manipulates or varies, and the dependent variable is measuring the results of the experiment. So we're pretty much trying to observe the influence of the independent variable on the dependent variable. How I like to think about it in order to help remember the difference between the independent and the dependent variables is the relationship between the mother and a child. Think about it. A mother is an adult. She is independent. She decides what she's going to do, and then she decides what's going to happen with the child, what hobbies he might be enrolled in, or what he's going to be eating or watching throughout the day. The behavior of the child is dependent on what the mother is going to decide. If that confused you, then forget what I said. If it didn't and it clarified, then good. There are two usually groups or more, but the two types of groups we have in psychology, and it is the experimental group and the control group. The experimental group consists of participants exposed to the independent variable, and the control group consists of participants who were not exposed to the independent variable. So for example, if your independent variable is violent media show, participants in the experimental group will watch a violent media show, and whereas participants in the control group will not watch the violent media show. And the reason why we have usually control groups when conducting psychological research is to make sure that to have an example of what is going to happen with the participants when they're not exposed to the independent variable. So what's going to happen to the participants when they're not exposed to the violent media show? Because if we do get that participants are exhibiting more violent behavior both after watching the show and when not watching the show, then our experiment was a failure because we did not show that the violent media show exposure actually contributes to aggressive behavior, for example. So, for example, research question, and that's usually the question that we're asking, that we're interested in. For example, does the use of cell phone while driving influence driving ability? What is our IV? It's the cell phone use. What is our dependent variable? Driving abilities. So in this case, we're interested in seeing how whether you use your cell phone or not while driving can influence your driving abilities. And the research, a fun fact, not really fun, but just so you know, participants who drive and talk on their cell phone exhibit driving abilities similar to as if those participants were legally drunk. Participants or individuals in general who text while driving exhibit worse driving abilities than those who are legally drunk. And in this case, as I said, our condition 1 was the driving with the cell phone, and the condition 2 was driving without the use of a cell phone. So in this case, condition 1 was the experimental condition, and condition 2 was the control condition. Another example, does listening to music improves learning abilities? So what is our independent variable and what is our dependent variable? So our independent variable is the listening to the music. The dependent variable is our learning abilities. So condition 1 is listening to music while learning. So that was going to be our experimental condition. And condition 2 is not listening to music while learning. And that is going to be our control condition. Another very important element in psychological research is random assignment. And random assignment is when participant has an equal chance of being in either the experimental group or the control group. And the purpose of a random assignment is to make sure that what you're actually manipulating, aka your independent variable, is actually influencing your dependent variable and not something else. So if I were to have all the morning people who come in the morning for my study, place them in one group, let's say listening to music while studying, but all my evening people who come in the afternoon or in the evening, place them in the control group where they're not listening to music. Because I did not use random assignment and just took, all the morning people and put them in one group and all the evening people put them in the other group, I introduced the variable of the difference between morning people and night people. Therefore, it's very important to have random assignment in your experiment, where participants come in, you go to group 1, another one comes in, you go to group 2, etc. Correlation is not causation, and it is a very important statement. First of all, correlation is the existence of a consistent systematic relationship between two events, measures, or variables. Causation is the act of causing some effect. So for example, in this picture we see everybody who went to the moon has eaten chicken. Good grief, chicken makes you go to the moon. So there is a correlational relationship. There is some sort of a systematic relationship between eating chicken and going to the moon. However, it is not a causal relationship. People who eat chicken don't necessarily go to the moon, or people who go to the moon, not necessarily it causes them to eat more chicken. Therefore, it's very important to distinguish between those two elements. So the following statement has a loophole. I've been taking vitamin C tablets and I haven't had a cold all year. Vitamin C is great. What can be the loophole in this case? The loophole is that there is a correlational relationship between taking vitamin C and not having a cold. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that if I'll take vitamin C, I will necessarily not have a cold throughout the whole year. It is a correlational relationship, not a causal. Positive correlation is when both of the variables increase or decrease in a similar manner. So the positive or the negative element of the correlation doesn't necessarily talk about increasing in the variable, so reading more or studying more, but rather on the directionality of the two variables. So if you study more, your grades are going to be higher. It is a positive relationship. Otherwise, if you study less, you will have worse grades. And this, once again, it is not a causal relationship. That doesn't mean that necessarily that happens, but there is a certain relationship between the two variables. Negative correlation is when one of the variables increases while the other one decreases, and vice versa. So for example, the more video games you might be playing and engaging with, the lower your grades can possibly be. Or vice versa, the less video games you play, the more time you have to study, so your grades might be possibly higher. So once again, not a causal relationship, but just a correlation, and in this case, a negative correlation. But can there be another variable? So it is not only important to show a correlational relationship between two variables, not and even a causal relationship between variable x and variable y, but it's very important to know that there's not another variable that can explain the effect. So for example, consumption of ice cream leads to higher crime rates. Our IV is the consumption of ice cream. Our DV is the rates of crime. Is it a causal relationship? What can be a possible explanation for this relationship? Heat. When it's hot, people consume more ice cream, but when it's hot, people might be getting more angry quicker. There might be more people outside, so the crime rates might go up. The research process, as a general, has several steps in it. So first of all, we ask a question, the research question that we're interested in. Then we propose a hypothesis, which is a proposed explanation for a phenomenon. The research question is an actual question, whereas the hypothesis is a statement, what we think is going to happen. So for example, if our research question is talking on a cell phone influence driving ability, our hypothesis might be individuals talking on a cell phone will be worse than drivers than individuals not talking on a cell phone. Or alternatively, we might think that individuals talking on a cell phone will be better drivers than individuals not talking on a cell phone. And we usually come up with the hypotheses before we conduct the research. Then we identify our IV, independent variable, and the DV, which we already covered. Then there's a method section. So the method section or process is us actually designing what we're actually going to be doing. How many participants do we need? Are there certain characteristics that we should include or participants that we should exclude based on their characteristics? So as you saw on SONA, there are some studies that would like non-smokers only. So that's what I mean by characteristics. What type of surveys or questionnaires are we going to be completing? Okay, so if we're interested in a cell phone use on driving abilities, how are we going to identify what is a good driving ability? Is it how many stop signs they stop at, their speed limit following, etc. The results section is we actually describe the results. So we say, using cell phone while driving makes you have worse driving abilities. We also usually confirm or reject our hypotheses, so whether we were correct in our prediction or not. And very important thing, we talk about the flaws and weaknesses of studies. As researchers, it's very important to know to critique other research in order to do your own research better. So some examples of flaws and weaknesses of a study can be that the researcher did not use random assignment, that the researcher exhibited research bias, is when you know that a participant in a certain group, what you think they should be acting. So if they're watching a fun and happy video and I expect their mood to be better after watching that video and I know in what group they are, I might be smiling more towards them. I might, as a researcher, affect their behavior. So if researchers exhibit research bias, if researchers draw a causal relationship between two variables when there is a third variable that can explain this relationship, and researcher drawing causal relationship between two variables when there is only a correlational relationship between the two. For the in-class activity, you need to complete, you're provided with 2 short descriptions of psychological studies, and you need to identify the necessary components, so the hypotheses, the independent variable, the dependent variable, as well as the flaws and weaknesses of the studies. This in-class activity will be located under assignment called IC-A, I believe, and with today's dates, which is January 22nd. I would like you to complete this activity before class on Tuesday, and I would like you to complete this activity with your group members because it is a group. I would like you to complete it with your groups. All right, if you have any question, please email me. Thank you.